All right, welcome everybody. Today, I have back again. We've done several podcasts together on many topics. Dustin Nemos, who's going to talk about young Earth.
Yeah, thank you for having me back on, Dave. I feel like it's a kind of a forgotten topic. It's a missed topic in the flat or cosmology community. We overlook this one, and I think it's important because if you look at the flat Earth science, like it's basically more than just scientific. It's proof for a creator. It's proof of God. It's proof for some creator. And I think that the young Earth aspect is at least equally strong evidence for a creator. So I think it's curious from, many angles, but, it plays into the cosmology. It plays into the genetics. It plays into the archaeology. We can approach it from all sorts of angles.
All right, I have lots of
I'll
questions.
share screen as I go.
I have lots of questions and lots of things. I mean, we have the missing 1,000 years or million. Is it a million years or 1,000 years or a billion years? Which one is it?
1,000 years roughly that they had edited with different types of.
Yeah, but isn't there like a geological missing time also? There's something massive there. I forget, but that's right. The 1,000 years, and then there's so many evidences of like trees growing through rocks that are supposedly millions of years old or whatever, fossilized in there.
Yeah.
Without hearing anything you have to say today, and I'm a novice at this young Earth thing, I say the Earth is young. I say it's somewhere around 5,000 years, give or take. That's my guess.
Yeah, and it seems like all the actual scientific evidence, other than carbon dating, which is totally bogus and debunked and full of holes.
Yeah.
And useful for spitting out random old numbers. That's about it. Even evolution.
It's like the COVID test. It's a random number.
Yeah, exactly. You get false positives of deep time.
Yeah.
And there is no deep time. For example, covering things like genetics. Can I do screen share?
Oh, yeah. I have to say that. Oops.
I want to be able to share some of the quotes as graphics as I go.
Yeah, no problem. I just have to
use the term biblical Earth. I know most people use flat Earth or true Earth, whatever.
Okay.
When I use biblical Earth, I want to define that. It's young, it's stationary, it's geocentric, it's flat, obviously, it's hollow, and it's also domed. So most people in the flat community, they understand stationary, geocentric, and flat already. Many of them understand the firmament aspect of it and an enclosed system versus an open system. And now I think people are starting to wake up to the young thing as well. So I just went back to the Bible on this, but it seems like the science absolutely confirms it. So jumping over from that to the main aspect today, which is young, and I talked about how it spits out random numbers. I'll quote this evolutionist, Dr. Robert Lee. He says, no matter how useful it is, though, this radiocarbon method is still not capable of yielding accurate and reliable results. There are gross discrepancies. The chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are actually selected dates. This whole blessed thing is nothing but 13th century alchemy, and it all depends upon which funny paper you read. So, there are a number of strong scientific method evidences to confirm young Earth. I'll list a few, and I'll go through some of my favorites because I don't want to take up too much time. One, there's very little sediment on the seafloor. There should be massive amounts if there is indeed deep time, just like there should be massive amounts of bones everywhere, and there's not. Two, there's bent rock layers. There are soft tissue in fossils. People talk about the dinosaur thing, and many people are realizing that some of the dinosaurs were actually found or have now been identified to have sort of a soft tissue, not billions of years old, completely calcified, but still enough gumminess that they can get DNA out of it. So it was only partially calcified. So these things are not as old as they're telling us. And I think there's been over 15 or 16 species now. There's cover-ups. People have lost their careers, etc. The faint sun paradox, the rapidly decaying magnetic field, helium in radioactive rocks, which helium dating is accurate and far more effective.
Helium dating? I'm unaware of that.
Yeah. And carbon-14 in fossils, coal, and diamonds, which it's short-lived. If it was billions of years old, it wouldn't be there. So things like short-lived comets, little salt in the sea, and DNA in ancient bacteria. Now, I got this list from the Answers in Genesis. I think it is Answers magazine. But there's more even than that on top of some of the things that we found. People tried to use ice cores to prove, how old the Earth is, billions of years. But what I found was they had built-in presumptions into the science. So instead of accounting for like different things like the flood and considering that there may be larger water levels, they just basically chunked it up into like a certain amount, I think an inch or so each, and then determined each one was a year or so and so. So they made presumptions rather than account for the types of water found. There was a huge layer of flood water, and then there were other layers of like different purities and such. So ice cores actually prove young Earth rather than prove deep time or ancient Earth. That's just one of the things that I found. The soil strata layers, the so-called layers laid down by, they call it time. They think it's the rings of a tree. The older it gets, the more they get, and there's more rings, and it just concentric from the circle kind of thing. But in fact, and I'm going to keep going through a couple.
I have a question about sediment. Like when you look at the Grand Canyon, in other places you have all these layers of the white layer and the brown layer, and then like what happens? Like for 1,000 years, white stuff starts settling, and then it goes, all right, now we're going to turn orange, and now we're going to turn brown. Let's go back to white. What's going on there?
Well, it's called the Great Unconformity. You can find a really good example of it at the Grand Canyon. I'm going to pull up my flood article briefly because that's where I've got the images
the fact that there's Egyptian tunnels and buildings and stuff at the bottom of Grand Canyon debunk the entire Grand Canyon?
Well, it's not what they say it is. I mean, it's there, and there's temples and such in it, but you can see these layers that are basically sticking out perfectly like water level, except for certain places in the world where they've been broken. And at the Grand Canyon, they say it was formed over billions and billions of years, but there's something called the mini Grand Canyon, which was formed in 30 minutes by a flood, and it's identical in shape. It's just a smaller scale, almost identical shape. And that's basically what happened. The Grand Canyon was formed quickly by the flood, and that's why you see these different layers laid down as sediment by water, strata layers, not over time like a tree ring, but laid down by water according to density. And you go down into there, and you basically find the same sort of fossils that would be consistent with a 6,000-year life cycle of planet Earth. So there are things that they misinterpret in science, and they're obviously everywhere. Like you can dig anywhere in the world and find evidence of this one, but they'll tell you it's evidence of deep time, as though soil builds up over time. Any farmer can tell you that it's the opposite generally.
How old is the Earth?
It's hard to build soil.
How old is the Earth?
About 6,000 years, yeah.
So let me ask you a question. 5,306 years, 364 days ago, what was here?
Wait. You mean right after creation?
Yeah, right after when the world was created.
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve were here. Did God throw them down and say, here's a loincloth, I hope you find fire soon? Or did he hook them up with some infrastructure?
Well, there was a garden and immortality at first, and every kind of amazing food was basically there, and there was no death, and it was a good existence. It was a good condition. And then there was rebellion and sin, and we sort of fell into punishment and discipline phase, and we have been there since, and it's been a slippery slope of.
So wait, we just went from Adam and Eve right to where we're kind of in hell right now. So,
well, for example, I'll go to some of the genetic evidences for young Earth, and that leads it back to the Adam and Eve thing. So there's something called mitochondrial Eve. You've probably seen the monkey clay-faced woman in all the museums that are always made out of clay because they can't find any of these. They can't find a single one.
No.
They've tried to fake it a few times with examples like the Piltdown Man or Lucy, but it's always a fake. It's always man bones, monkey bones mixed together or something. So they've never actually been able to find what's called the missing link. And Darwin admitted this completely destroys his evolutionary theories. But in the mitochondrial Eve genetics, which are a part of human DNA, we can prove we all go back to a single woman through actually 3 sons and a man that survived a worldwide catastrophe. The whole story of Noah is also in our cells. But in terms of time and dating, we have the mtDNA mutation rates, which is something that evolutionists freaked out about when they found out that it actually is accelerated. They're thinking billions of years originally, but that was an assumption. The actual evidence shows, and I'll read it here and I'll zoom in so we can see this. When discovered, the evolutionist articles had titles such as, quote, mtDNA mutation rates, no need to panic, end quote. However, when these rates were checked out against the real world results, they indicate that the mitochondrial molecular clock is ticking at a much faster rate than evolutionists believe possible. So the actual mutation rate puts mitochondrial Eve, the mother of us all, about 6,000 years ago. So all of the actual evidence, again, will confirm young Earth. So it's kind of like with the other sciences, as we've seen. A lot of times they basically built a narrative, and no matter what evidence you bring, they have their own interpretation of it, and they refuse to see anything other than that because they have a narrative to push. So if you have any questions, I'll break for that, but otherwise I'll go through a couple of more points.
Actually, I have a lot of questions. I might be jumping forward, so you tell me. Sure. So you've looked into the old world buildings, the stuff that been here way longer than they're telling us, right? Not even just the pyramids, but all of these basilicas and castles and just crazy stuff. And they say, oh, this was built in 1700, but the picture of it looks like 500 years old or older, back then. So where did that come from? Was it built by angels?
So I have another post on this at the Serapeum that goes into the pre-flood age of Tartaria, Lemuria, Mu, Atlantis, whatever you want to call it. They had different names for it, different regions and such, but basically the age of Atlantis, the pre-flood world. And they were ruled by basically a fallen angel worshiping death cult of baby sacrificers who had corrupted their flesh. They had basically become demigods and giants. And Plato wrote about this. He talked about how they mingled their blood too often with mortal admixture. And he was sort of like, one of the groupies, he was lamenting it. He was sad about it. But basically, he thought that it led to their downfall through the gods' actions, which led to the flood and punishment or whatever. And the Christian perspective is like the story of Noah and all flesh being corrupted. But basically, what you have is this genetic reset and this worldwide catastrophe that ends all life except for this one, again, genetically provable situation. So that leads back into like the chromosomal bottleneck of what they call the Younger Dryas period, a catastrophe, right? And it ended all life on Earth except for these three men who repopulated all of human society. So I can show the mitochondrial genetic bottleneck as well, if you'd like. But that's the story of Atlantis. That's all these weird buildings. That's why we can't build some of them like they used to. So, even today, we can't match the Cyclopean masonry where the stones just mesh together like Tetris pieces.
So there was some, for lack of a better word, some angelic building practices.
Well, they were more advanced in technology than we are. Genetically, astronomically,
right. They were immortal. They had and they were able to create kingdoms.
Yeah. So for example, the Cro-Magnon man, they weren't immortal necessarily, but they were so much longer lived. Cro-Magnon man has the same genetics and basically brain size as modern man, but they have like way thicker, denser bones. They look like Terminators compared to us. And the reason is just like nose and ears, your features in certain parts of your bones, like your brow, continued to grow over time. So if you're living for 600-700 years, you're going to be a way denser, stronger, more hale, skeletal, than a younger, short-lived 100-year human, which by their standards, we're going to be frail and skeletal and sickly and stick-like compared to them. So same species, just much shorter lifespan. Excuse me. So it's in the story of the genetics. It's in the archaeology, the soil. It's everywhere.
Wow. All right. Continue.
So another point is I would point to like a 6,000 year or what I would say is a biblical population size for today. If you actually consider the flood survivors, 6 to 8 people repopulating the world, really, I don't even think Noah had any more children. So, 3 to 6, but anyway, 6 to 8. Yeah, 6 is right. Approximate about 0.5% growth rate on the conservative side. And today it's more like 1%. So that's kind of slow even. And over 4,500 years, which is more than sufficient to allow for wars, famines, diseases, and stuff, you end up with about roughly 8 billion people. If it had been hundreds of thousands of years or more, there would be trillions of us or trillions of bones. We're not finding that. The graveyards are still limited somewhat. They're
What
getting
about
bigger.
all the crazy catacombs that they're finding with
Yeah.
millions and millions and millions of bones
Yes.
ornately stacked? What's up with that?
Well, that's the death cults and the secret societies, but it's not the same thing as trillions. I mean, they did
Yeah,
kill lots of people over history, and it's happened again and again and again, a cyclical destruction. But and there's also been cataclysms and such as well.
sure.
But I mean, yeah, there are death cults in power
I
for
mean, you
sure.
would think if there was a massive semi-worldwide mud flood that would wipe out a majority of the population instantly,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they'd be just you wouldn't find them unless you're digging and digging and digging.
Well, that's why you find a lot of dinosaurs in like the death pose, where they're suffocating even when they were in mid fight or something,
Are there
and they're trying to breathe.
are you saying there's real dinosaurs, or are we looking at dragons or something?
Dragons are real dinosaurs. Basically, the etymology of those two words is almost identical, so
Yeah,
they're almost the same thing, really.
I think dinosaurs were invented by the guy that literally came up with the paper and then a year later discovered the first one. Um, is to hide dragons.
Yeah, they're trying to hide the mythological nature of the true reality, and they don't want us to know all this stuff like God is real and monsters are real, and there's a death cult that believes in the fallen angels. So,
Wait, just going back to the Garden of Eden in a second.
sure, go ahead.
I've got some amateur questions here. Amateur questions. So
That's fine. Yeah,
God
I
throws
totally
down
don't know.
Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden. It's an amazing place. Do they have beds? Are they in a house? Do they have a castle? Do they have a kitchen?
Good question. I imagine they had something that was pretty cool. They were not dumb people, and
Right.
they advanced.
That's
I
what I
imagine
say.
there was probably like a stone age of a couple of weeks, and then God was personally helping Adam with the necessities, and then at some point, Adam is the
So
forefather of like thousands or tens of thousands, maybe millions of people in his lifetime, and he's got lots to help to figure things out, lots of resources, and things advance quickly, especially with the Watchers of Genesis 6. They
why
brought
why did God create Earth and man?
so that's sort of a subjective thing. I mean, partly to glorify himself, but I mean, really, that's sort of the generic answer. I mean, I think he was probably just bored or lonely.
Okay,
What
so
else
but
did he?
here's my thing. The Earth realm is an
Yeah,
amazing, incredible, beyond our understanding
yeah.
creation. If I'm going to create this crazy place and create Adam and Eve, right? I'm going to throw down some kick-ass infrastructure. Okay, I'm going to throw down some buildings, tunnels,
Yeah.
free energy. I'm going to throw down the whole thing. Why not? Because it's going to make it far more interesting. That's my, I don't know if I want to call it a belief, but I'm like suspicion. Does that go against anything biblically
Well,
that God
so
created these kingdoms?
I wouldn't say that like the technology all came from God, because there was the Genesis 6 event, and they basically traded technology for children's blood and access to people and worship. And the fallen watchers became the gods of every mythology on earth, and they were essentially just like since what I would say is the return of the watchers in prophecy, which is around the time of Roswell. They've come back, and now we're seeing the same thing happen again. So since like the time of the 40s and 50s, we have seen all the so-called alien abductions and obsession with sex and experimentation, but also a rise in abortion, a rise in technology, and explosion in space and alien obsession, which is just really their new branding, their new image. Aleister Crowley said
Who
today they
created the
call them.
Watchers?
So they are Elohim. They're part of the heavenly family. They're rebel angels.
So were they created before or after Adam and Eve?
Before,
Before. Did God create them?
yes,
Okay.
with free will, and that's the
Okay.
thing.
All
Everybody
right.
gets a chance to rebel.
Did God create all beings?
Not the Nephilim, but I mean,
Wait, okay.
generally
Wait. All right.
speaking.
Where did the Nephilim come from?
So Genesis 6 watchers had human offspring hybrids with human women. They took
But
physical
human
bodies and
women
had
created by
babies.
God and Nephilim created by God. I mean, create Watchers
So,
created the
so
Nephilim.
angel human hybrids,
Right.
basically.
But God created both of them, and then they created.
Yes.
Right, that's still
Yeah.
God created. That's still that's the
Well, if you
God still
so
gets credit for that.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you can do it today. For example, if you mix a liger and a tiger and a lion in the right way, because it's the right male, the right female, I forget, or it doesn't work. You can get rid of the growth inhibitor gene, and you get a giant cat. It never stops growing until the day it dies. It gets the size of a tank. It eats more than 10 other lions, and if it ever escaped, it would absolutely be able to breed. They're absolutely fertile. People think they're not, and it would outcompete, and eventually it would come for man because it was so hungry. That's what happened with the Genesis 6 event, because the Greeks call it the clash of the titans. They got so big they started to kill each other. They were so hungry.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like
So
I'm talking to Chat GBT here because when I ask you a question, it comes back. It's really detailed. Like if I throw in short answer, the short answer.
yeah, I mean, I try. There's so
No, no,
much
you're doing
context.
great. You're doing great. It's awesome.
The,
I'm kidding.
the Watchers is one of the most fascinating stories of all like human history, because it's basically a large part of the source of evil. It's the source of all of the gods of every non-Christian faith on earth, all the mythology, all the giants, all the wisdom serpents, the Apkallu of Sumeria, etc. So it's a fascinating story, and it leads to it. You know, it goes into every other topic. But in terms of like measuring time, I'll give you a couple of quotes that I've collected from various scientists of different backgrounds. And this is a geologist, Andrew Snelling. So he says, if the if the Bible presents a concise timeline of history, where does the idea of millions of years come from? Geologists like Charles Lyell wanted to replace the history recorded in Genesis with a naturalistic history of their own construction. They started with the idea of long ages, then interpreted the rocks in light of their new paradigm. Today, geologists rely on measuring radioisotope decay and interpret its results in terms of the conventional paradigm. Yet anomalies in these dating methods question these conclusions. Instead, one can look at geological formations to see evidence of a young Earth transformed by a global catastrophe, the flat and enormous extent of sedimentary layers, a lack of deep and widespread erosion between most layers, and evidence that sediment was rapidly deposited by huge amounts of water, end quote. So, I mean, I've got a number of these paleontologists, geologists. It depends on how much time you want to give me on this. Microbiologists, marine biologists. Essentially, all science points to a young Earth except carbon dating, and that's kind of the real theme that I want to get across for people today. And that includes the debunking of evolution. And I know that's even with flat earthers, you get pushback on this one for some reason. Like, we know the science is bogus in every other way. Some people still hold on to this one. So, you know, I don't mean any offense, but evolution is absolutely destroyed.
Wait a minute. There's people that believe in evolution still?
Yeah, I don't know how, but it's still there.
There's nobody. I disagree. I don't think there's any flat earthers that believe in evolution.
I hope you're right by now, but I've had like headaches with this one. So people don't want to believe in young Earth, and they don't want to believe evolution didn't happen. A lot of them, strangely, even among.
I mean, there's micro evolution.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's never a change in kinds. There's adaptation within the kind.
Yeah, yeah. Like men like women with long fingers, and therefore women with long fingers will become more prevalent, and then we'll have more long fingered women.
Yeah. But you'll never see a woman turn from a monkey or a frog turning into a dog or anything like that. And I don't want to go like spend too much time on evolution, but there's screenshot. There's a lot of reasons right there. You can go into this article, Forbidden Genetics, Evolution is a Lie. And that's part of the whole time thing. That's part of why they're faking deep time. That's part of the agenda, obviously, to hide God, just like with the flat Earth. But most people just aren't aware of young Earth. And I just wanted to be able to introduce that to people. And I know you're the guy to help me to get that to the community.
I'm open to everything, but if I had to guess, I'm saying young Earth. It makes sense. Young Earth created with infrastructure, and all of our history, we're trying to figure it out. You're putting a lot of it together.
I'm trying.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I had the suspicion that there might have been a time here where there were trillions of people. What do you think about that?
Well, there was a huge population that suddenly and abruptly ended. And
yeah, where did they go?
Find evidence for that.
Did they
the flood wiped them out?
Flood wiped them out, or did they go somewhere else?
Well, there are examples like the Anasazi that happened later. They were like playing with like demonic summoning and cannibalism and blood magic, and then boom, they're all gone, hiding in the mountains, and suddenly just immediately gone completely. So yeah, there are contemporary examples, a little bit more modern, not contemporary, but Sodom and Gomorrah, local judgments, regional floods, that kind of thing. But there was a worldwide flood.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. Anyone that denies that, the question, you can deny whether it was worldwide or it was different at different times, but there's evidence of
Yeah,
everywhere. I mean, there's stuff underground, which is ridiculous. I had a question, but I lost it. It'll come back. Whoa, going down.
it's fine. I mean, I kind of covered the main points. There's a lot of other quotes I can go to in terms of various sciences backgrounds and the debunk of evolution or anything else. But that's kind of what I wanted to get across. And I don't want to take up too much of your time. But if you have other questions, I'm happy to go through those.
I had I'm really looking into the population of the old world and how people traveled around and like all these buildings that don't have toilets. You got a 300 room palace with one bathroom or no bathrooms.
Wow.
What's up with that?
I wasn't even aware of that part. That's strange. I know
Yeah.
that they had ethereal energy generators in the towers or minarets or whatever they're called, and that those have been systematically destroyed and replaced and like deleted from history, basically, even targeted in war times with missiles, like just random
And
missile
how
accident.
about the bells? Are you familiar with
Yeah,
you're familiar with the bells?
yeah, the bells and it's kind of a similar part of the technology. Same
Yeah.
thing. They were also deleted. They were also
I recently
systematically
heard
destroyed.
with all the hurricanes that have been happening that back in the day when the bells were around, when a hurricane was coming, all the churches or the places with the big bells, whether they're churches or not, would ring the bells and it would dissipate the hurricane. The vibration would break up the eye wall.
I have heard that. I don't know if there's any science to back it up.
I,
Certainly, the acoustics could have an impact.
Wait, and I've seen demonstrations with acoustics affecting different things. That makes perfect sense to me. It makes more sense than jumping dry ice into a hurricane, which does
Yeah,
do something. So, uh, yeah, it's interesting. And then the organs in these churches that most of them won't even use anymore, but they're like I don't know. Were they churches back then? Were they healing centers? Were they just part of the a great infrastructure that was laid down for man?
yeah. It's part of the mystery of sort of the age of Atlantis. It was something great that was corrupted, um, and then through a final judgment destroyed, and then the survivors rebuilt, and then that plays into like the story of Nimrod and trying to sort of bring it back. And he ran on it. He basically ran to be president of the world and on a ticket of kill God, get revenge, bring back the pre-flood glory.
Was George Washington a giant?
Um, okay, so technically speaking, 48 plus presidents were related to King John Lackland III, who was himself a claimed descendant of King Arthur, who the body was about 9 feet tall. I did a spaces on Twitter about King Arthur recently with Ian Malcolm. And we went into sort of the exhumation of the body and the myth versus the reality and such. But yeah, probably most of them are related to the giants.
Right. I was it George Washington or Abraham Lincoln that people are saying was a giant.
Oh, Abe was definitely, he was probably a giant. And he
Yeah.
actually knew about the giants, strangely enough. There's a famous quote about
And
him when he saw Niagara Falls about it.
Abe lived in a log cabin while they were building incredible palaces next door, like stuff that we
Yeah.
couldn't build today. But he lived in a little hut. That's the
Yeah.
story we're told.
Yeah. They're lying, obviously, about
Everything.
where these things came from, when they were built, by whom, et cetera. They're fabricating it all and then trying to
So
cover it up.
so when did giants freely roam North America? 150 years ago? Longer?
Okay, so the most recent thing I could point to would be like for example, there were multiple legends, but the Lovelock, Nevada Indians had a legend about sort of gathering the tribes to fight the local cannibal giants that were raping and pillaging and eating them. And they ran them into a cave and smoked them to death because they refused to surrender. And that cave was recently found with a bunch of redheaded, like 9 footers or so in there. So that's no longer a legend. It was real. It was reality. There's also the Anasazi stuff, and there's a bunch of other. I mean, every people on every continent basically have had to deal with giants of various names, from furbolgs to to fairies. I mean, they're all basically the descendants of the Nephilim.
So you talked about the giants. They eat, they get hungry. They eat, they were eating people because they got hungry. I'm 6 feet
Yeah.
tall. I get really hungry sometimes. Imagine if I was 9 feet tall.
Yeah. And just to be able to
I
keep their
might have
heart
need
beating,
somebody.
they had to eat like a cow a day. And then it got worse and worse and worse
Wow.
until humans were no longer even big enough to eat. They had to eat each other.
Too
And the
bony.
Greeks call that the clash of the Titans.
Wow. What
Yeah.
about this is going out there a little bit. I don't, maybe not. Um, about them all being God striking down and turning them into stone. Is that a thing?
Which legend is that?
I don't know. There's some legends where everything was turned to stone. And when I was a kid, there was all these cartoons about the giants
Yeah.
and how these angels or God would come down and strike them and turn them into mountains.
Okay, so you can find titans still today sticking out of the mountains,
I've
and they are
seen it.
basically petrified.
I've
Yeah.
seen it.
So there is possibly some truth to that, although I don't think it was like turned to stone. I think it happened through the petrification process of the flood and the minerals that were like quickly hitting the bones and the flesh, and I think that's why we have like the big giant titan trees, like the Devil's Tower. I think that's why we have these petrified mountain titans and other types of petrified preserved history for us.
Interesting.
Yeah, it happened quickly though.
All right, where can people find your work on all of this stuff to dig deeper than this short little podcast?
So theserapeum.com is my hidden history archive of all the science, the history, the theology, the esoteric side of what's happening today, all the conspiracies connected. And I still cover the news at nemosnewsnetwork.com. So it's sort of like both sides.
Is there one place to get all of your links? Is there one place?
DustinNemos.com.
DustinNemos.com. You can find the Serapeum because if you can't spell it, you can spell Dustin Nemos and everything's there. So DustinNemos.com. Perfect.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Dave, for letting me go through like flat Earth and young Earth stuff together.
My favorite.
I want people to be fully armed, and the cosmology is advancing. It's not just flat anymore. It's young too.
Yeah. I mean, I used to laugh at young Earth. I used to laugh at the Bible. I used to laugh at flat Earth. I used to laugh at all the things. I was I guess I was projecting. I don't know.
I was an arrogant atheist my whole life. I would invite the pastors into my house when they knocked on the door with like all the kids with them and such. And I set them down and be like, why do you worship a God that kills babies? And I was proud and arrogant of my false knowledge of fake science and such. And I saw answers to the questions later. It was the Nephilim; they were eating people. But basically, people approach this with bias and arrogance, and they won't find the truth. You have to be humble to find the truth.
Last question, slightly off topic. We have free will. Why is it people like you and I can wake up to this, and there's other people that no matter what you do, they will not snap out of it? Is it something with their soul? What is it?
It is. I mean, so God himself, Yahweh, puts a delusion on people if they are, for example, arrogant or hate him, and they will not be allowed to find certain truths, even if they are normally like sane, rational people. It may be ego, it may be fear, but at some point they're being blocked and they will not be allowed to know unless they approach it with humility. I think that's the actual they're evidence-based approach here.
They're kind of being karmically punished for their attitude.
Yeah, you see so many intelligent people reject flat Earth because flat Earth proves God.
Yeah.
And even if they normally know that 2 + 2 is 4, in this case they will say, "Hell no, you're a flat tard" or whatever, because they cannot accept it.
Yeah,
it's a pride or a cowardice thing.
It's so amazing. Like I have my brothers and sister. I can't even talk to them. I don't talk to them, and because if I did, we'd have nothing to talk about. And I used to say other than the weather, but we can't even talk about the weather anymore because that's fake as fuck.
You'd think that by now, with so many people dropping us suddenly, it's like everyone would have felt the pain and be curious. But some people just put their head in the sand further.
Why? Yeah, there's some people that there's nothing that will wake them up. You can put it right in front of their face. They won't look.
even when Haitians like break in and steal their cat with machetes and forks, they're not going to wake up.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's happening.
The world is amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. The world
gallows humor, but yeah,
it's yeah. I mean,
and I think it's coming to an end for those who are like curious about like the Christian prophecy.
You just said God loves humor. you know the story about Greg Locke, the pastor, and Dean Odell. They had their debate down in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Do you remember what happened to his church afterwards?
I didn't hear the aftermath, but I saw the
So one of the things that Dean was fighting about, he's talked about when God scrolled back the sky and then let the waters in, and Dean's like denied. He goes, that's not what that means, right? That's not what that means. A month later in Tennessee, where it normally doesn't snow, it snowed so hard that his church collapsed. The entire church got leveled because God opened up the sky and let the water in. I
shouldn't laugh.
No,
but the irony.
Funny. It is.
Yeah, the irony.
Nobody got hurt, so that's good.
Yeah.
But the irony is that he literally was saying that when that happened, I'm like, this can't even be true, because that was like one of the big contentions of their fight. And so,
God will not be mocked.
Yeah.
And the what we're seeing is all of the blind pastors who are leading their sheep into the pit, into the ditch, the blind leading the blind, have forsaken their role as watchmen. And they will be held accountable. They will be punished for this. But because of what they have done, many sheep have perished that did not need to perish.
All right. On that uplifting note, Dustin.
And on that, I have uncensored.church for those people who are tired of those types
of pastors. Is that linked at DustinNemos.com?
Yes.
Uncensored Church? All right. Because when you give out more than 2 URLs, people forget both of them. All right?
I know.
So that's why.
I'm a complicated man.
Yeah, that's why you can find all my stuff at flatearthdave.com. Everything's there. All my socials, everything. I don't tell anyone anything else because everything's at DustinNemos.com.
I should do that then. I should just
everything should be at one place that people can remember. That's it. Because I'm the worst. I'm the worst. Someone's like, oh, I'm like, where's your stuff at? Oh, you can find me on Instagram here. You can find me on this. You forget it because they're not the same. Right?
You're right. I'll start doing that.
DustinNemos.com. That's it. Everything's there. All right, Pete. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave.
All right.